Welcome to a Stellaris quick build. Today we'll be going over a build I use pretty commonly in my single player games. And just to preface this video, I do play quite a bit of Stellaris, primarily single player. I play occasionally with my friends on multiplayer, but in no way are these builds meant to be top tier. It's more so something for players who may be new to the game or returning players looking to try out something a little bit different, a little bit specific. Today I'll be starting with something I've used recently, which is kind of a Unity Rush build. This one focuses quite heavily on producing Unity. We have stuff like Fanatic Spiritualist, Exalted Priesthood, as well as Traditional. So we'll get a little bit more into the build here, and how it plays out and works. Oops. Go to Edit. So we can skip over most of the appearance stuff. Personally, I like birds, so I use birds, or avian. Species name, name list, those don't matter too much, just for roleplay purposes. I'll go over what I used. I just randomized, got Han, and I chose avian 3, because I like the planet names and I like the leader names especially. For traits, here's kind of some of the meat and potatoes of what our species will use. We'll get into latent psionic later. But for negative traits first, we'll start with those. I use sedentary, because pop growth from immigration is relatively unimportant and won't really impact you too much. Resettlement cost, also not very important. And we can remove this at a point where maybe we're wanting to resettle pops. And then the other negative trait is unruly. Unruly is basically free. In the early game, it's going to do almost nothing. And in the late game, we can kind of negate it with our government. So we'll go over that later. But for our positive traits, we use traditional, because like I said, trying to produce as much unity as possible. Adaptive, because we are a biological empire, so that means we're going to be kind of behind on expansion compared to robotics. Or other empires that maybe have some other habitability bonuses. This is just a personal preference. Makes it a little bit easier to expand, a little bit less demanding on our resources. And rapid breeders. Rapid breeders is just kind of, in my opinion, one of the most necessary traits. Pop is king in Stellaris, as you'll come to find. And rapid breeders gives us additional pop. For name and class, this one's actually kind of important. I prefer dry worlds, and I prefer arid. The reason why I prefer dry, as you can see here, there are 3 tiers: dry, wet, frozen. Dry worlds are more likely to roll you generator districts, which produce you energy. Wet worlds are more likely to give you agricultural districts, which give you food, and frozen, it's more likely to give you mining districts, which give you minerals. The reason why I've chosen arid out of the 3 is there is an event where you can randomly terraform a planet, and if it succeeds, it will turn it into an arid world. It seems very fringe, but it is kind of nice. In the event that you do get that anomaly, and you do succeed, you now have a perfect habitability world for your biological pops, and it can be pretty early in the game. Name doesn't matter. Solar system can matter if you're looking for something that's a little bit less random. I would recommend taking the Deneb system. It's for the Commonwealth of Man. I believe it starts you out with a size 20 planet, guaranteed every single time. So if you're not looking to get like a size 18 capital world, but you're also not looking to, possibly random into a size bigger than 20, take Deneb. City Parrots, purely RP. For the origin, Teachers of the Shroud is the one we're going to be going. We start with latent psionic, so we do not have to random into the psionic trait or the psionic kind of like origin ascension path. We just get it right off the bat. We also can build a Shroud Beacon, and we start in contact with a Shroud Walker Enclave, which will give us kind of like a story, as well as some benefits down the line. But overall, starting with psionic, as we saw here, is very good. It means some of our leaders can just be psionic at the start of the game, or fully psychic. And also, we get a little bit of extra research, which is why I decided to not go for intelligent. You can stack it, which is nice. We're going for more of a Unity build, so like we kind of shore up that weakness there. And then also we get a little bit of extra energy credits, which plays in quite nicely with having a dry world. So that's that. For government and ethics, like I said, Unity Rush build, we're going to be going Fanatic Spiritualist. Not optimal for most builds. But for this build, it is pretty fun. You get Edict cost reduction by 20%, Edict upkeep reduction by 20%, and an additional 20% monthly Unity. All very good. We get access to the Temple building, very powerful replacement for just the irregular Bureaucrat building. And we cannot use full AI rights. Also took Authoritarian. This will help us expand early with the extra monthly influence, as well as resource pop worker output. So that's kind of weird, but you get 5% extra to that. So that's like food, minerals, energy. Quite nice. Helps us early in the early game, and that's really what you need in Stellaris. Is a more powerful early game will translate into a more powerful late game. So we take this over egalitarian simply because I'm saying, what about Unity? Faction Unity gain. That's pretty good. True. But getting the 0.5 monthly influence means that we're more likely to snag systems that are important, as well as we need fewer pops working those worker pop resource jobs, the worker jobs. For this build, we go dictatorial, just empire size effect. It's reduced by 10%. So that helps us offset any of the negatives of unruly, or it kind of helps bring that back in line. And then for the civics, we take exalted priesthood. We get extra unity from priests, very good. And then capital buildings replace some of the politician jobs with high priests. And high priests are just strictly better politicians. Get some extra unity from them. It's very nice. And I take cutthroat politics. This one, pretty interesting to play with, especially when you factor in the Fanatic Spiritualist. So Edict's upkeep from Fanatic Spiritualist reduces by 20%, and Cutthroat reduces it by an additional 20%. That's 40% right off the bat, which means you basically don't need to take one of the Ascension perks, which gives you an additional 100 Edict Cap, which I believe is Divine. No, it's not Divine Authority, but it's the one that gives you 100 extra Edict Cap. I'll have to bring up the name here later. But this combo really helps you out, especially if you happen to roll a charismatic leader, which will reduce the upkeep by an additional 20%, I believe. So you can get up to 60% at the start of the game if you random into a good leader. Code breaking, not huge. It's better than people give it credit for, I will admit. Especially something to consider is that you will get ascendance or transcendence early, which means your pops will become full psionic a lot earlier than a normal biological empire with the same stuff, just without the Teachers of the Shroud Origin. You'll get it before them, which means you have access to 2 additional code breaking from that transcendence. Stacking that with this means you have +3 code breaking, which means if you send a envoy to build a spy network, you're more likely to figure out what the AI is building, or if you're playing a multiplayer game just kind of casually, you're a lot more likely to be able to figure out what your friends are doing, maybe where their fleets are, their fleet makeup. It can be pretty useful. I would say, aside from cutthroat politics, there are a few good options. I would ignore most of these masterful crafters if you're trying to make the build just like more meta. This is just always good. For now, it gives you extra engineering research, and it makes your artisans a lot better. They're artificers, and as well, the huge thing is that you get 1 extra building slot per 3 industrial districts. Quite nice. Police state gives you some extra unity. You will have telepaths, so that's good. Stability is great. And Shadow Council is kind of interesting. I've played with it before. It still gives you the code breaking, and it gives you ruler resource output, which, as you notice from Exalted Priesthood, we start with High Priests instead of Politicians. So it increases their output by an additional 10%. Over the course of the game, it can equate to a little bit more unity, but personally, I like Cutthroat Politics. The Advisor voice, just roll a Spiritualist. Name can be whatever you want. Ship appearance and flag can be whatever you want. I prefer kind of the yellows and reds in this game. They look kind of nice. And surprisingly, I like the molluscoid ship type. If you look at the cruisers and battleships, they look very kind of organic looking, and then I also like kind of on the opposite side. I like the reptilian, because it's pretty much polar opposite. It's very bulky and square, but it doesn't actually matter. And then for ruler, also does not matter. But that is the build in a nutshell. This is what it ends up looking like. Should look similar to this, of course, with whatever RP elements you want. And then for setup, for game details, I recommend Spiral, Medium, Standard AI, Standard Tech. If you're beginner, just do Standard Crisis. I've adjusted these to be a bit earlier, and I play on Grand Admiral, of course, with hyperlane density, wormhole pairs, guaranteed habitable worlds, all the same. Caravaneers, L-gates, and Xenocompatibility, sorry, I all turn off for the reason that it will improve your performance, especially L-gates and especially Xenocompatibility. I'm not going to get too much into that, but it will really improve your performance. But aside from that, that should be the entire build. Thank you for tuning in. Next week I'm going to try to crank out another build for one of my other